Hey, everybody. Welcome again to the Words of Life podcast with Adam Kitt and Kevin Bruni. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Adam. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. A long time no see.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, Kevin is actually heading out of town here in a little bit for about 10 days or so, and that's going to limit our recording time. So we're doing this one back to back from our second episode on Esther to our third episode on Esther. So to pick up from where we left off last week, we got into the book of Esther and the story of Esther, and we found all of the plot twists of the massive feasts that King Ahasuerus was putting on, resulting in his desire to display Queen Vashti as his prized possession in front of all of the people of the court, so that they could see how beautiful she was, like just an object, a thing, rather than a human that he should have cherished. She refused to come, and that resulted in his pride being hurt a little bit and asking for legal advice on what should be done. A decree was then sent out across all of the land that the women of the Empire of Persia should honor their husbands and respect their husbands, so that the status quo would be maintained, and that the king could maintain a little bit of his own ego and pride. So after a time passed, we don't know exactly how long, he remembers Vashti. He probably regrets his decision, because when he made it, he was drunk. Merry with wine, we can only interpret that as probably drunk. And he regrets it. So the young men of his court say, hey, well, let's host a massive beauty contest. So they start gathering up all of the beautiful young virgins of the land and bringing them into court, into the concubines, and under the charge of the eunuchs, who would see to their beautification. So Esther is one of those. She is the first cousin and adopted daughter of a man named Mordecai, a Benjamite, who was one of the Jews, or a descendant of the Jews that were taken captive under Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. So what did I miss, Kev? I'm sure I missed a few details.
I guess just the key thing here is that Esther wins, right? Esther wins the contest, so she's now the new Vashti, and a feast has been thrown in her honor. Taxes were there, but the key thing is that she has won. So we've got all the players now set up sort of in place, right? How Esther has come to be in the position she is in, and how Mordecai is going to have some sort of ear to the king, if you will, which will sort of be where our story starts here tonight.
Exactly. So pulling up our text, this is the end of chapter 2, and it's pretty short. We'll go ahead and just read that really quick so we can get some really good context. So now when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not made known her kindred or her people as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So, because Mordecai's habit was to always be checking in on Esther as his daughter, he just happened to be in the king's gate. Although I think later on, doesn't it refer to him as a guard of some sort?
Yeah, maybe. But he either way, he sort of overhears this plot, right, that's going on. So how he overhears it, or what sort of comes to his attention, is that these guys are disgruntled employees, you may call them, and their plan is that we're gonna kill the king. Just quite an extreme step there.
Right.
And so they're gonna lay hands on him, and he hears about it. He gets it reported to the king in his own name. Esther says, "Hey, my surrogate father, or whatever, a man
My
named
dad.
Mordecai, who I
Yeah.
know, he has overheard of a plot. The king doesn't take her word for it. There's an investigation which is done. It turns out to be true. They are executed, as would be the case of trying to kill the king or lay hands on him. And so, what is known here then, or what's being set up at least, is something for later, right? That
Right.
Mordecai's name has been recorded in the Chronicles as doing the king a solid, right? He's done him a favor,
Right.
and that guy's got some credit coming from the king one of these days, right? And so he's been recorded as being a loyal subject of the king who has done a good deed for him, has prevented this assassination plot, and it's been recorded down in the official record, right? That he's a friend to the king.
Yep. And as we know from later context, nothing immediately was done for Mordecai.
Yeah.
But we're soon going to find that changes. So let's get into our next chapter here. Unless there's anything else we need to point out, I don't think so.
Yeah, no, let's get the next major player here who's introduced in
Yeah.
chapter 3 for us, right?
All right.
Yeah, so as we dig into chapter 3 here, right, we get another player on the scene, right? If we're thinking of the sort of play structure that is laid out here, or novel structure is laid out here, that we get this guy who gets a promotion, Haman. And he gets basically set in charge of all of the other officials, or he's put in the number 2 place, we might say, right? And so we've seen things like this before, that people get elevated up in this way. And Daniel goes in and he does his work in Babylon, interprets the dream and things. He gets elevated above all the others, right? That happens. And we'll see something similar with Joseph, right? As he comes to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh, and you're the wisest guy who would execute this plan. We say, we're going to elevate you above all the other people, right? And so this is what's happened here to this guy, Haman. He's sort of set into the highest place, chief of the officials. And, because of that, as he's promoted in that way, there may be some sort of ceremony there or whatever has happened there, to him. But whenever he walks by, people bow down and they pay him honor, which he likes. Right? He likes that thing happening for him. But again, as we've said previously, a lot of these things hinge, the events in the story hinge on the pride of men. And that's what happens here. Mordecai does not bow down or pay him honor. And this makes him upset, right? In fact, they tell him, hey, you got to bow down to this guy, right? You're disobeying the king. We don't do this. Other people are saying that you got to bow down. You got to bow down. But he doesn't listen. He won't do it. And so the people tell Haman, hey, there's this guy, right, who doesn't bow down to you.
Not just any guy.
Yeah, and we know this guy's a Jew.
This is one of those Jews.
Yeah. And so because of that, he's filled with rage, and his wounded pride knows no bounds, because he doesn't want to just have Mordecai executed. He decides, I'm going to kill all of his people, every Jew that I can put my hands on here in the kingdom. We're going to try and get them all executed. That's the only thing that will satiate me. And so that's what he's going to try and do. He's going to try and come up with a plot, if you will, to wipe out all of the Jews in the kingdom of Ahasuerus, or where was it? In all of Persia is what's going to happen here. So he casts lots to find the date they're going to do that, and that's an important little bit there. Again, as we've sort of looked at the end already. The purpose of this novella is to explain the beginning of the Feast of Purim. And as we'll see here, it says they cast the pure, which is they cast lots, the word for it, right? And so that's where this feast will get its name, is from the fact that lots were cast to determine the date on which they were all going to be exterminated, which is quite a thing, right? I'm gonna carry out genocide in this entire nation. Let's pick a date. How? I'll roll the dice. Let's see what comes up, right?
Yeah, it was the first Dungeons and Dragons.
Cast the date here for when this is going to happen.
Figure out the numbers of my spell, or the date of my
initiative. And so that's what he does here. And that they come up with a particular day. And that date then is going to be the day that he decides we're going to wipe all these people out, right? But certainly he can't execute that on his own because he's not the king. So like we've said, he appeals to Ahasuerus and says, hey, he doesn't tell the real story, which is quite interesting. Which he could have gone in and said, hey, there's this guy who I don't like, and he's wounded my pride because he won't bow down to me, and I want to eliminate all of his people in your kingdom, right? I'm going to commit genocide against his people because he doesn't bow down to me. It seems clear that we can infer anyway that would not have worked, because that's not the approach he uses. He tries something else, and so he effectively tries to plant in the king's mind there are people who would be treasonous, right? People who do not obey your laws, people that don't listen to you, people whose customs are different. He does what happens quite often in the realm of human history, and still goes on today, is I'm going to paint people as the other, right? The people I don't like, I will paint them as the other. And if I can get people enraged at the other, then I can get my way and I can advance, in this case, in my own agenda, my own political career, that Haman is trying to do. But again, he does it by othering, a group of people.
Yeah.
They're different than us. They don't do the same things as us. They don't follow your rules, king, right? They're criminals. And so we ought to wipe them out. And that seems to please the king. And just to sweeten the pot, he says, and I'll pay for it. Right. You send the men to kill people. Right. And people do it in any sort of expense. I'll pay up to 10,000 talents of silver. We'll put it in the king's treasury, which could be that, hey, I'm effectively bribing you, or he's saying it won't even cost you a dime. Right. If you do your soldiers do it, I'm going to cover the bill. And Ahasuerus may be thinking, hey, if I can get people to do it for cheaper than that, then I get to keep the difference. So sounds good. I like it. Right. let's do this. And money's given. People also do as seems good to you, right?
Yep.
To make this happen, to execute this plan here, which again is all about just dealing with Haman's wounded pride that this guy won't bow down to him. I mean, that's what this comes down to.
So it is interesting also to note, again, just kind of keeping the entire timeline of the story of Esther and all that. Right in verse 7, this is the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus. So right. Esther at this point has been at least 5 years as the queen concubine, or Queen Esther.
Yeah, in a position of power and pleasure to the king. And what we also noted previously, which is important as well, is he's got these people. He's one that lays this out, but it is not known to anyone that Esther is a Jew, right?
Right.
And so that's true for the king, but it doesn't appear. I don't think it even says here, right, that he says there's these people that live in this way that are very different from us, and we want to wipe them out. He doesn't even say they're Jewish to them. But if Haman had known that she was Jewish, I wonder if that would have changed his plan or his approach there. But he doesn't know that she's a Jew, that the queen herself is Jewish, and so he's going to try and carry out this plot. It seems clear that if he had known that she was Jewish, or if the king had known she was Jewish, and Haman had come in and said, hey, there's these people, the Jews, that wouldn't have worked, because he liked her. He was, hey, what? I'm not going to wipe out all of them. Why don't we just kill this guy, or whatever your real problem is? She seems good to me. But it's not clear that that's being played out on the up and up, right?
Right. And you would think that Mordecai would have been well known enough as the surrogate dad of the queen.
Yeah, right.
And yet Haman is oblivious to that fact.
Yeah, and that may be true, right? There may not be clear that that's the relationship between them may not even be entirely clear to people as well, right?
Right.
That he's the one who has raised her. It's not evident that she has even told anyone that Mordecai is the person who has raised me, right?
That's true.
That relationship is secret. You just, as far as he knows, he's another servant, he's another whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that the relationship between those two may not even be apparent. It's not clear. It's just, hey, I heard this from my surrogate father. It's just, hey, it's been reported by this man named Mordecai, right? Which is probably more likely that this plot has been uncovered, right? Because it would seem like as well, if that relationship was clear, the king would have done something more immediate, right? If he knew the person who had uncovered the plot was also the surrogate father of his favorite woman, right? It wouldn't have just been write it down and we'll get around to it one day, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not entirely convinced that anyone knows the relationship between those two.
No, that's a good point. That's good. But it would seem that the eunuchs or somebody they would know that he's always
Yeah,
inquiring
he's always
about her,
around. He's
right? I
trying
mean,
to,
I don't know. How
yeah.
does that become remain a secret? But
Yep.
but regardless, there's obviously a disconnect
Yep.
between the concubines and the harems, and then the court.
Yep.
So yeah, that's good. So yeah, Haman plans this great massacre, basically, of an unwanted people in the land of the king. And the king says, well, yeah, we don't want those people here, assuming you're telling me the truth, which is unfortunate, because that is basically what he's assumed to have brought the king the truth, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's a second in command, right? He's his chief official. He put some sort of trust in him, otherwise he wouldn't be in this position anyway, right? So I'll take your word for it. I mean, what's he going to do? He's going to say, let's investigate this matter further. Haman, go investigate, right? Like
who's he going to send? Well, the guy's
he's
already
assumed
here, right?
this has already happened, right? Hey,
Yeah.
and by the way, I'm bringing you reports of some things that we've already done and some stuff we've uncovered in our investigations throughout the kingdom already, right? We got this dangerous sect of people. We should wipe them out. They're a danger to the nation. And so he says, yeah, that sounds good. Do what seems good to you. You handle it.
Engage, number one, right?
Yeah,
engage,
that's right.
right?
Exactly. Take care of it. And so that's what they go to do. So they write this out because, this is all happening in effectively the capital city, right? The citadel at Susa. But they're going to spread this word throughout the whole region, the whole Persian Empire. They're going to, as we might sort of think in our minds anyway, right? You see these older movies, send out the people on horseback with the messengers. They ride through the towns and villages and throw the pamphlets out and hammer them to all the doors and whatever in the city square. This is the decree of the king, right? And so they carry that message out everywhere. And the thing that's interesting to me is twofold here. One, it's very clear in verse 13. We're going to annihilate all of these people, young, old, women, and children, right? We're wiping them all out. And hey, anyone who wants to get involved in that, it is sanctioned genocide. And you may then, any Jew you kill, you can just plunder their goods. You can just take their stuff, right? So even if you're like maybe didn't have a beef with the Jews yourself, we're leaning on the fact that, but you could make a buck, right? Just kill them and take his stuff. So we're playing a little bit on the greed of people as well, because again, you're asking him to wipe out fellow citizens that are women and children even, right? There's no sort of indication that any of these things that he has said is true in this way. They're a danger to the people, right? They have different customs, but they appear to obey the king's laws, generally speaking, right? Outside of maybe some sort of religious bits. But it looks as though generally they're keeping the king's laws, they're keeping the king's peace. And we see that's true because once it happens, the result of the people is general confusion, right? That they're like, what? Why are we killing these people? What's going on here? You just get this decree, wipe out all the Jews. But it seems to cause some level of confusion, which I think will come back a little bit in the end when this sort of gets flipped around, why people are so quick to sort of, it's almost like they didn't want to do this in the first place, right? But the king's commanded it, so I guess we have to kill them all because it's the king's command, right?
Yeah, so right there at the end, and the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. So you can only imagine what kind of an uproar this would have caused. And assuming that a large contingent of the Jewish culture was probably in Susa, I mean, that's where Mordecai and Esther are from, then there's probably a big population of Jews there.
Yeah, and when we're thinking about who is it that's thrown into confusion, I mean, one, it's going to be the people who are hearing this message carried out, but also it's going to be the Jewish people, right? Like, wait, what did we do? What are you talking? Like, this note shows up. Let's say you go out and you walk in the city square one morning, and there's this new proclamation from the king. You go up and you read it, and it says you're going to get killed on this day. And what did I wait? What did I do? Why is he
Yeah.
suddenly? We've lived here for 100 years at this point. Our people were carried off by the previous regime. You took over. When you took over, you were like, hey, go back. You can go. You seem favorable to us, right? I mean, when Cyrus comes through, he's favorable to them, which again is a little bit of the previous administration, a little bit, but it's still sort of Medo-Persian here, as the Persians have now risen to power. But the idea here is, wait, you've never had a problem with us before, right? Now, what did we do? What
We've been
changed,
great.
right?
We've been great citizens in your
We've
country.
been taxes when you were
Yeah.
up when that's Esther's feast day and no taxes are charged. But it's what happened, right? They're just totally perplexed and confused, right? Why are we being marked for genocide when nothing is, as we can tell, is different from yesterday?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Nothing has occurred. There's no event that's been linked to it. It wasn't an uprising and they were Jewish. There's not a destruction of royal property done by Jews, right? None of these things has happened. It's just random.
No known sin against the state.
That's right. Yeah.
Like, we've done nothing wrong. This is completely outrageous. How could you do this? And
that's right.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Can you imagine? Like literally, we've in our recent history, we've had genocidal things take place. Maybe not in my lifetime.
Sure.
But it's recent enough history where we know people who have been through them and been affected. World War II being the one that comes to mind.
Sure.
And Nazi Germany and all of the things that took place there with the Holocaust and just, again, coincidence or not, it was anti-Jew sentiment and just widespread. I mean, at least these people got like a heads up.
Some warning, right?
It's going to be this date.
Yeah.
Instead of just, hey, we're knocking on your door. You're a Jew. You're into an internment camp, or you're just outright killed because
that's right.
So
yeah, and
I can't imagine the reality of this.
Right. That's right.
Potentially happening
when it hits you like that. Yeah. The other thing that's interesting, this idea that they were thrown into confusion, which again, some of the translations say they were perplexed, right? And that struck me because I'd been going through 2 Corinthians recently, and Paul there will talk about, all these things that happened to them, right? We're pressed in, but not crushed. These things. One of the things that we are perplexed. And that word there, at least in the Greek, is this idea of that we are like lost in the labyrinth, right? So we're confused. We have no way out is sort of the meaning of the word perplexed. And in the Hebrew, it's not too different. In fact, you'll see the same word get used when it talks about the Exodus and the people are going out and they get out there in the wilderness and the Egyptians say, oh, they are entangled, right? They've backed themselves up against the sea. They're trapped in. And that word they're entangled or they're wandering around out there is why we should go get them back. And so that idea here is that, there's no way out. So that idea of confusion does sort of suggest that the people who are confused are the Jews themselves. We have no way out. We are confused. We are perplexed, and we see no way out of this situation. And so it's not just like I'm working on this math problem that's hard and I'm a little confused by it. It's I'm trapped in a situation and there's no way out for me. And so that's going to lead to this idea of desperation that will immediately take place when this happens. We'll get a personal one man's personal reaction to the message, right? Which I'm sure is typical, or is supposed to let us know this is what most of the people were confused. This is what their perplexion and confusion looked like, emotionally speaking, when we roll into the next chapter here.
Yep. Well, let's just do that. So the city is thrown into confusion, which of course would include Mordecai himself. Hearing word of this decree. So Mordecai then learns, as it says there in verse 1, all that had been done. And in very traditional Hebrew response, he tears his clothes, he puts on sackcloth and ashes, and goes out into the midst of the city, crying out loud and bitter.
Yeah.
And you talk about, and he's not the only one doing this.
No. In fact, it says right in the next in verse 3, right, that in every province wherever it had reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many also, right. So not everyone, but many also did the same thing as far as going in sackcloth and ashes there, right, to show their great despair. And again, not just to show their despair, but like we said, this appears to be the type of thing that you did to gain the attention of the divine, right? God, hear me, right? Hear my desperate situation here. And so this fasting, this weeping, this lamenting, and this sackcloth and ashes was to draw the eye of God towards you, as it would be, to say, hey, we need deliverance here. And so that's what's going on. I do, like's not the right word, but this little hit there that he only went as far as the king's gate, right? He wouldn't go inside the inner sort of area there of the citadel, because you were not allowed to come into that area in sackcloth, right? And it just sort of speaks to this thing we saw back in chapter 1 of, right, this place is curtained and linened and the floor is mosaic, and don't bring your dirty sackcloth in here, right? Like no one comes into the king's presence in this way to bring this sort of thing. The king doesn't want to see that, right? He doesn't want to have that sort of brought before his royal presence. In fact, the king is busy drinking with his buddy, right? Like, don't bring your mourning and your complaint in here, sort of a thing. Just the disregard sort of for human life in this story is somewhat striking or shocking, that the king is like, yeah, I just signed the death warrant of, a ton of people, and I'm going to go have a drink with my buddy now. And all the people outside are wailing, right? Because these are the people you're going to kill, right? That are just regular folks. But he doesn't even want to see them, right? Don't let those kind of people come into my presence. So he's just separated and cut off from the ramifications of his actions here. And yeah, it's, we get the same sort of an idea, right? That Esther hears about this and she's distressed. And again, this sort of relationship that is somewhat known and not known, maybe is going on display here, because they come and tell Esther what's going on, but her servants and her eunuchs, they don't come and tell her because she's Jewish, right? It's not that, hey, oh my goodness, the Jews are being wiped out, because they will assume, much like the king himself, she doesn't care, right? Why would she care the Jews are being wiped out? But they come and tell her that, hey, that guy who, somehow he's always interested in you and asking about you, and he brought you that report. Remember Mordecai, that guy that found the plot against the king, and you took his name before the king? Hey, that guy's hanging outside the gate dressed in sackcloth and ashes, right? Thought you might want to know. You seem interested in this guy. And her response is to try and send him clothes, right? He tries to say, hey, go get dressed. Don't do this thing. Which is interesting as well, because it sort of suggests that maybe she doesn't even know, right? Like, why he's doing this, what's going on. She hasn't heard of the decree. She's living a bit of a sheltered life as well in the harem. And says, hey, go get him dressed and clean him up, right? But he will not. He won't do it. So then she says, well, go find out what's happened, right? Why is he so upset? What is going on? Why is this thing? And so then he says, this is what's happened, right? The destruction of the Jews. And here's the written decree, and go take that to her. And he's careful to sort of say, at least in that, she's Jewish as well, right? Like he doesn't sort of out her, if you will. But he says, this is what's happened. This is the exact sum of money that's going to be promised in the treasuries. Here's a copy of the decree. Show it to Esther and explain it to her, and command her to go to the king and beg for favor to get this changed, right? So that's the carry back that he just brings. He doesn't suggest any way that you're in danger, right? It's again this cover story, if you will, that this guy you like, a friend of yours, is in trouble, right?
Right. And plead with him on behalf of her people. I guess that could be interpreted.
Sure.
Multiple ways.
Yeah. And so that's the thing there, right? Though that's maybe the only hint.
Right.
But he says, go tell her to plead on behalf of these ones. And again, it's hard to tell if that's his words, plead on behalf of her people, or if we're getting the narration, right? He tells her, go plead on behalf of her people, who are the Jews, right? Like, we know that, but the people in the story do not know that.
Yep.
Right. And so, he carries that word to her, right? That this is the thing. And here we get sort of an interesting little historical tidbit, maybe, about her response and her position relative to the king, right? Up to this point, it seems like, she's his favorite and she can get whatever she wants. She's gone in and told the king about a plot and everything's great, right? Like, yeah, of course she'll just get what she wants if she goes to ask the king. But she sends a very interesting response back, right? About sort of the rule or the law, or whether that's the actual law or whether that's just the way that the king is, right? Which is, hey, you got to be called to go into the presence of the king, right? I can't just barge in there and tell him and beg for your life. Because if you come to the king and he doesn't want to see you, he can kill you, right? Unless he says, yeah, you're good, hold out the scepter to him and grant him an audience. Then I could be killed, right? So she's telling him, this is not, this thing you're asking is not maybe as simple as it appears. And again, that's why there's some speculation about what was her status actually. Because if you look at sort of Persian historical records, as far as we can see, it looked as though the queen had sort of access to the king and these things, and this would not have applied to her per se. But in this case, it's very clear that you got to be invited by the king, at least in my position. I don't have that level of exempt status here.
Right.
I'm as equal in danger.
And he hasn't called me for a month.
And he hasn't called. That's right. He hasn't called me to come into him for 30 days. And so she only came to see the king at his pleasure, right? Which was, again, if we're being blunt here, was largely sexual, I'm sure, right? That, go to the harem and send for my favorite one, right? That I want her tonight. And he hasn't called for me for 30 days, right? He's called other women. He's called whatever, but he hasn't called me in this time. I can't just go in to see him like that. I don't have that kind of access. We might say.
Yep. Yeah, it's really crazy,
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting also that this conversation that we're having is happening with the help of this guy Hathak.
Yeah, he's carrying words back and forth. Yeah.
He's just the messenger, and he's and apparently he's genuine and honest and doing a good job of being a messenger. He's not seeking any political gain by maneuvering or manipulating anything. He's really just there.
Carrying the words.
He probably really liked Esther and wanted to do good for her,
Well, and so as we talk about this secret, right? It is likely that some people know Esther's secret here, and this guy is probably one of them.
Probably.
He is trusted by her enough to carry her messages back and forth to this guy who is a known Jew. Why would you care about this guy? Well, he's my surrogate father, right? He's my kin. And when Mordecai sends the message back, it is very clear at that point that the message which is being carried relates to the fact that she is Jewish, right? And so that would be a dangerous message,
right,
to entrust to just anybody.
Yep.
So they both have a clear thing that you can trust this guy. He is a trusted servant of mine. He will keep the things we communicate back and forth secret. He will not, they're putting their lives in this man's hand as he carries messages back and forth. And so it's very clear that they have a level of trust in him and that he is devoted to her. And the favor that extends to Esther, then this guy favors her. He's a servant of hers for sure, but it's more than just that. Because he could use this to his advantage and trying to gain some sort of status, but he is true to his charge and carries this message. And I think this is where this section in here is kind of how we kind of came to this book in the first place, right?
Yes, it is.
Right in this section here, which again, people will sometimes ask, is what's your favorite verse, or who's your favorite character, or these kinds of things. And I will often mention Mordecai as one of my favorite characters because of this statement that he makes here, right? And so he tells her straight out, right? Hey, listen, if you think you're going to escape, you're worried about getting killed by going into the king, unannounced, right? But you're going to die anyway, right? Don't think if you keep quiet, that's going to somehow preserve your life.
Right.
You're not going to escape any more than any of the rest of the Jews. People know. There are people who know, and someone's going to rat you out, right? Seems to be the indication of what he's suggesting here. And then he says sort of the most important thing in the lesson we can kind of get out of this. That's quite interesting. If you do keep silent at this time, and you would expect something that's missing, if you keep silent this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether or not you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this.
Yep.
Right. Which I sort of expected. God will deliver us from some, right? But it's just deliverance will arise from some other place. Which again, the implication there is why will deliverance come from somewhere else, Mordecai? What makes you think that, right? Well, it's because of our relationship to the Almighty, right? He's our God. He takes care of us. We are His people. He will deliver us from this thing, and so you can be a part of that. Or, right, you can decide not to be, and God's going to do what He's going to do anyway. He's going to deliver us. So we might as well get in line with the program, right? This might be the very reason you're in the place that you are right now, is because God has put you here. I mean, just look at the unlikeliness of the situation, right? How did you get to where you are? Because God's moving you to this place to deliver us. And I'm sure He's playing on, or my guess, right? My speculation is, Hadassah, Esther, she knows all the stories. She knows all the things. She's going to somehow feel her position is similar to that of Joseph, right? And how he was able to deliver the Israelites and his family way back in the day from the famine, right? And he says, "Oh, God has moved all these things and brought me to this place to be the
Right.
deliverance."
Well, when Joseph finally spoke to his brothers at the end, right,
Yeah.
he said,
You
"You
meant
meant
it,
it
right?
for evil,
Right.
but God meant it for good."
That's right. God meant it, and He did. And so He's kind of doing that same thing, right? You're in a position to deliver us. How do you think you got there, right? You really just think it's because you're that good looking. You really just think it's because you're that clever,
Or maybe you're that good looking so that you could
so
be in
that
this
you could get there.
position.
That's right. You
Right?
are, because God made you that way so that you could get to this
So
place,
one
right?
way or another, God made you that way and put you in this place for this exact moment in time.
Yeah, and there's an interesting thing there though too, because he doesn't know that, right?
No,
Mordecai doesn't have any sort of
he's not.
insight, right?
He's
It's
not. He's
not
not
God has
called
told
a
me.
prophet.
Yeah.
You know.
He's just saying, listen, you don't know why you are where you are, but if you believe in God, then you ought to take advantage of this opportunity, because you can't know. And so you might as well get on the Lord's side here, right? You might as well be the one who tries to deliver, because if God's going to deliver, He's going to deliver, and He's going to use you. And if you're not part of that plan, then at least you'll still be well pleasing to God, right? But the alternative is God put you in position to do something and you didn't do it, right? And so it's sort of like that famous philosophical discussion about, can you know there's a God or not, right? And the way it boils down is, you can't really know, this philosopher thought. It's like at the far end of the universe, a coin is being flipped, right? You can't know if it's going to be heads or tails, but you got to call one of them, right? And one side is God does exist and you choose to believe in Him. Well, what do? You get rewards. And if you're wrong, you get nothing, right? It doesn't matter. It didn't matter anyway. God wasn't real. But if He is real and you bet no, right? Then that's a bad outcome. You should have just bet yes, because it's the better odds, right? As you're playing the odds, if you will. And He's kind of doing the same thing. Hey, you're in the position, go and stand forth for God's people. And because the alternative is, you were here for this and you bet wrong, right? You didn't step up when you should have.
Yeah. So when it comes to what is often coined as the phrase a leap of faith, when it comes to these acts of faith that we see given to us in these stories throughout the Bible, how are we, the question we need to all ask ourselves, how do we adopt that kind of an attitude so that we are aware of, willing to act on, and content with whatever outcome happens, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the big life lesson for us. We have to be truly humble enough to submit our own will to God, take on His will, to be observant and sensitive enough for opportunities that might make us just like Esther.
Yeah.
Who knows if I'm not in this place, in this time, in this very instant, specifically because God wants me to be. And if that is the case, what act or action would God want me to be doing right now? And that's a really hard thing to take on and to become habitual. It's just hard. It's one of the tough challenges of living in this life, because quite frankly, we're so distracted.
Yeah.
We're distracted with our phones. We're distracted with our jobs. We're distracted with all of the constant content like this, for instance. It's not necessarily a distraction, but there are millions and millions and millions of hours of content stuff being thrown at us
Yeah.
everywhere today, in this modern world, from Facebook to Instagram to YouTube to TikTok to Snapchat to MySpace, or
Wow, MySpace. That's an old one there.
I
Yeah.
threw an old one out there. Um, the 24-hour news cycle,
Yep.
the radio, the Spotify music, podcasts. We are no longer content to just be at peace. We are dopamine addicts, constantly looking for something, right?
To entertain. Yeah.
And so the distraction, plus, and then on top of that, you have the American wealth that we just enjoy, so much ease of life, that it's hard. It's such a big challenge for us to step back, to disregard everything this world has to offer, like we read in the book of Ecclesiastes, like we read in Colossians, that we're supposed to set our mind in the future, in heaven, not in this world. And so how do we get there? We the only way to get there is by constant reflection, self-reflection, and a willingness to change.
Yeah, and I think you see that. You see a parallel sort of here as well. That we might say today, where he tells her, "Do not think yourself in the king's palace will escape more than anyone else." Right? We might say something. Don't think that your wealth or your status as an American is going to somehow deliver you or let you get around whatever God is planned and done. Right? That's a foolish sort of thought. Don't rest on those kinds of things. You have to recognize what's really going on here. God's plan is going to be executed, whether you're going to be a part of it or not. And so that's number one. And then the second is, I think, as he tells her this, what does she do? Right? She immediately says, "Okay, I want you to go. I want you to gather up all the Jews in Susa, and I want you to all fast on my behalf. And I want you to don't eat or drink for 3 days. And I and my young women, we will do likewise. And then I will go to the king. And if I perish, then I perish." Right? And so this idea here, again, is sort of unstated, right? But what's the purpose of the fast? The purpose of the fast is then also to pray. And so, this idea that I will take it to God, and I will find out what he says, and I will seek his favor. And then I'm going to step forward in faith, right? I'm going to do that thing. And so her sort of thought as well is almost, you're right. I can't know. And so I will do anyway, right? I will pray. I will move forward, and I will step up for God. I will step up for his people. And if I perish, I perish, right? And again, it's throwing back to sort of a few 100 years ago in this story, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego before Nebuchadnezzar, right? We're not going to bow down to you. We're not going to do whatever, and God will deliver us, or God won't, right? From the furnace. But he will deliver us from you, right? And if that's because he's going to kill us and we don't have to deal with your nonsense anymore, fine, right? But we're going to put it in God's hands, and we're going to be on his side, and whatever he decides, he decides. And so that mindset there of prayer and fasting, right, is something we could quite take on. I've noted several times in my life and I try to be more diligent about it now. That I would note that people who I might call, oh yeah, they're Christians, but they don't exactly believe the same kind of things I do, and I'm not really sure if they're real Christians or whatever. But they were far more, at least, diligent in saying, hey, I need to pray on that first before I make that decision, than I often heard growing up in my own circles, right?
Yep.
That they would say, I've prayed about it. I've thought about it. I've prayed about it, and I've meditated on it, and I've come to the decision I'm going to do X, right? And so that mindset of being prayerful in the making of decisions is something we would all do well to emulate here. She said, "Really, I spent 3 days not eating, right, and fasting and praying, and I'm asking all of the people of the city to do the same. We're going to petition the Almighty in that way first." And then I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I mean, she could have said, "You're right, Mordecai. Let's go do this right now. I'm marching into the king right this minute," right? But instead, she takes a different approach and says, "We're going to prepare ourselves spiritually for this battle that's happening." She recognized this is some sort of plot by the enemy to wipe us out, and so we're gonna take it to God, right? And then we're gonna step forth in faith and do that, because like 2 Corinthians, Paul says, we're walking by faith and not by sight. I don't care that the second in command is effectively stacked up against me, and he's got the king's decree on his side and the soldiers and the money. It doesn't matter what I see. I'm going to trust in faith in God that his promises, he's delivering his people, and I'm going to step up and do that thing.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap it up today, just in the light of the context we're talking about here, the last few minutes, as we leave the end of this study today, I would challenge you, the listeners, and myself and Kevin as well, to start every day with prayer, and to, like the Apostle Paul says, pray without ceasing, to be always mindful that God is there for us. He's watching us. He's looking out for us. He cares about us. He loves us. He loves you. He loves me. And that we should pray that the interactions with people that we have throughout the day, that we are open and ready and allowing the Spirit to guide us in any way that God sees fit, so that we are able to shine our lights bright and make an impact and possibly change somebody's life for the better by introducing them to Jesus and the good word and the good news of the gospel, that there is hope in this world, and that we are called to bring that hope to the world. So that's a big challenge.
It
big
is,
challenge
right?
for me.
It is, and it's a way to live your life, right? That you sort of think at every moment, every moment, and every opportunity, and every circumstance of your life has brought you to this exact place at this exact time to have this interaction with this exact person, right? What if the whole sum of your life, right, has been working together so you can meet this cashier at this grocery store today, right? Who's having this problem and whatever, and you can bring the gospel to them, right? Like you just, it's an amazing sort of mindset to take, that every moment in your life has brought you here, right? For what reason, right? Maybe the reason is this is the whole sum of your life right here in this moment. What are you going to do with it? And that's the choice you faced.
You could help to convert, the next Apostle Paul.
That's right. Yeah. So it's a good challenge and a good thought to end on. I think
absolutely. All right. God bless everybody. Again, always, if you have any needs or questions, please don't hesitate to reach out using the email provided here below, or in any of the commentary sections wherever you find this content, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or one of the podcasts. Please don't hesitate. We love you all, and God bless until next time. See you.